The desperate signal. The Velrathi had never been a people of desperation. Their civilization was built on equilibrium, balanced climates, balanced ecosystems, balanced governance. On Velra Prime, storms came gently and predators were rare enough to be studied rather than feared. Conflict, when it arose, was managed through councils and resource arbitration, not annihilation. For 10,000 cycles, the Velrathi Concord had believed this was not weakness, but enlightenment. That belief was dying. High strategist Kethron stood beneath the domed ceiling of the Grand War Hall, watching stars wink out one by one along the hololithic display. Each fading light marked another system lost to the enemy. Another evacuation failed. Another world silenced. Update, Kethron said quietly. The tactical intelligence node pulsed. The third defensive ring has collapsed. Enemy biofleets have breached the Cartial Corridor. Estimated time to Velra Prime, 42 cycles. A murmur rippled through the chamber. 42 cycles was nothing. Barely enough time to relocate the central archives. Not enough to save their people. The enemy had come from beyond mapped space. An extragalactic force that did not negotiate, did not communicate, and did not retreat. They consumed infrastructure, sterilized biospheres, and adapted faster than the Concord could analyze. Every doctrine the Velrathi relied upon, precision strikes, limited escalation, shield-based deterrence, failed against an adversary that welcomed losses as data. We have deployed all reserve fleets, another delegate said, her frills paling with stress. They will slow the advance, but they will die, Kethron finished, as the others did. Silence followed. The war hall was in use to such words. At the center of the chamber sat a sealed obelisk of obsidian alloy, untouched for centuries. It was not part of Velrathi architecture, nor any Concord species design. It predated their modern alliance, older than several member civilizations. The emergency outreach relic. Kethron felt the weight of it pressing on his thoughts. Activate the archive, he said. Reluctantly, the intelligence node complied. Ancient symbols unfolded into translated text and degraded visual records. Designation, Soul 3. Species, human. Classification, Deathworlder. Status, active, independent, unaligned. The images were unsettling even by modern standards. Primitive projectile weapons, chemical firestorms, cities burning under their own wars. Later records showed sleek warships, planetary bombardments, and casualty numbers that made junior analysts avert their gaze. Why was this never purged? A delegate whispered. Because it was deemed unnecessary, Kethron replied, and because no one wished to remember it. Humans had emerged from a world classified as a Class 10 death world. High gravity, volatile climate, endemic disease, and a biosphere where predation was constant. Where most Concord species evolved by avoiding conflict, humans evolved by surviving it. Their history was a near-continuous record of internal wars, extinction events, and technological acceleration driven by fear. They had not joined the Concord. They had been avoided. Historical analysis suggests human conflict tolerance exceeds galactic norms by a factor of, the node paused, recalculating, by a factor without reliable upper bound. A tremor ran through Kethron's secondary hearts. And their military capacity? Unknown, the node answered. They restrict external observation. Last confirmed engagement resulted in the permanent destabilization of 3 contested systems. The hall erupted. They are worse than the enemy. They cannot be controlled. They will not stop once unleashed. Kethron raised a limb for silence. And yet, he said, voice steady despite the fear coiling within him, they are still alive, still expanding, still undefeated. The projections shifted. Enemy vectors overlapped Concord space like a spreading infection. Probability curve collapsed into a single grim outcome. Extinction. We are out of time, Kethron said. If we do nothing, our culture ends quietly and forgotten. If we call them, he hesitated. We may survive. At what cost? Someone demanded. Kethron looked at the fading stars. Survival always has a cost. We have simply never been asked to pay it before. The vote was called. One by one, authorization glyphs lit the chamber. Some glowed bright with resolve. Others flickered with shame. The final count passed by the narrowest legal margin. The emergency outreach relic activated for the first time in 600 cycles. A signal burst outward, not a message of alliance or negotiation, but a raw, unfiltered distress call. Coordinates, tactical data, casualty projections, a confession of failure encoded in cold mathematics. We are losing. We are dying. We need help. The transmission vanished into the void. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the sensor screamed. FTL signatures, the intelligence node cried. Multiple, no, massive emergence vectors detected beyond the system edge. Kethron's frills flared in shock. Already? That distance should require. Space itself distorted. The stars bent inward as something enormous forced its way into real space. Then another, and another. Formation after formation, appearing with brutal precision. Not a scouting force, not an exploratory fleet. An armada. Human vessels filled the void, dark-hulled, angular, bristling with kinetic weaponry instead of elegant energy arrays. Their drives radiated containment fields so dense they warped local gravity. Identification transponders activated simultaneously, broadcasting a single designation across all channels. United Terran Fleet. Full mobilization status. No questions. No demands. A channel opened. A human face appeared, scarred, eyes steady, expression unreadable. "This is Admiral Sarah Calder of the United Terran Fleet," she said calmly. "We received your SOS." She paused, just long enough for dread to settle over the chamber. "Point us at what's threatening your extinction." For the first time since the war began, Kethron felt something worse than fear. He felt awe. The arrival of the Deathworlders. The human fleet did not enter Velrothi space so much as impose itself upon it. From the observation spire above Velra Prime, high strategist Kethron watched gravity behave incorrectly. Space rippled, folded, then tore open along vectors that Concord physicists had always deemed unsafe for inhabited systems. Human vessels emerged directly from those distortions. No buffer distance, no gradual deceleration. Several civilian satellites were torn apart by tidal shear before automated systems could register alarms. The humans did not apologize. They stabilized the damage and continued deploying. Layer by layer, the armada assembled itself with machine precision. Capital ships the size of city continents anchored the formation, their hulls plated with dense armor instead of luminous shielding. Smaller craft swarmed outward in disciplined vectors, not patrolling but claiming space. Every movement suggested a doctrine built around inevitability rather than elegance. "Fleet count estimate?" Kethron asked, his voice controlled with effort. The intelligence node pulsed erratically. "Uncertain. Human transponders indicate redundancy groups rather than numerical designations. Minimum confirmed hulls exceed Concord total by a factor of 3. The war hall filled with uneasy silence. Visual feeds were shared across the chamber as the humans opened limited transparency channels. What the Velrothi saw unsettled them more than the ships. Human crews moved with a casual efficiency that bordered on indifference. Gravity levels fluctuated wildly within their vessels. Some decks operated at forces that would have crushed most Concord species. Medical bays were enormous, equipped not for prevention, but for survival after catastrophic injury. Soldiers trained in full combat gear without atmospheric support, their faces marked by scars, old and new. "They live like this?" whispered a junior analyst. "Yes," replied a Velrothi biologist, her voice hollow. "They evolved like this." A secure diplomatic channel activated. Admiral Sarah Calder appeared again, this time seated within what seemed to be a stripped-down command center. No ornamentation, no ceremonial markings, only tactical displays and personnel moving in controlled urgency behind her. "We've ingested your data," Calder said. "Enemy composition, Vectors, reproduction rates, psychology, or lack thereof. Kethron inclined his crest respectfully. We regret the incompleteness of our records. Much of what we face defies prior models. Calder nodded once. That's fine. We adapt faster than most models. A ripple of discomfort passed through the chamber. There are, Kethron began carefully, certain interstellar conventions we must discuss. Weapons restrictions. Protected biospheres. Rules of engagement. Calder's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Strategist, she said, your conventions were written for wars that ended. She gestured, and the display shifted to projected casualty curves, Velrothi extinction timelines, refugee saturation points, genetic bottleneck projections. You're not in a war, Calder continued. You're in a terminal event. No one spoke. We will prioritize civilian survival where possible, she added. But our objective is not balance. It's termination of the threat. A Concord legal delegate found her voice. Termination to what extent? Calder looked directly into the camera. To the extent required. The channel closed. Across the fleet, human vessels began reconfiguring. Hull panels shifted. Internal compartments depressurized. Weapon ports opened. Not glowing energy apertures, but massive launch rails and armored silos. Kethron watched in mounting dread as targeting solutions were calculated faster than Concord systems could follow. They're not just planning battles, the intelligence node reported. They are mapping failure states, enemy collapse scenarios, psychological degradation curves. Psychological? Kethron echoed. A Velrothi cognition expert leaned forward, frills tight. They intend to frighten the enemy. But the enemy does not fear, another protested. The expert's voice shook. Everything fears hopelessness. The first engagement occurred at the Carshal Corridor. The Concord fleets arrived expecting a defensive stand. The humans arrived expecting a slaughter. Without warning, human forward elements accelerated directly into the enemy formation. Not firing, closing distance. Enemy weapons tore into them, stripping armor, venting compartments. Human ships did not retreat. At the moment of maximum overlap, hundreds of kinetic kill vehicles launched simultaneously. Not targeting ships, but navigation cores, reproduction hubs, command nodes. The enemy formation shattered. Human ships plunged through the wreckage, venting boarding teams into vacuum, breaching hulls that Concord doctrine would have written off as too dangerous to enter. Live feeds flooded the war hall. Humans fighting in zero atmosphere, using recoil as propulsion, dragging wounded comrades forward while continuing the assault. No hesitation, no visible fear. They're not defending, someone whispered. They're hunting, Kethron replied. Within minutes, the Carshal Corridor, lost for cycles, was silent. Enemy signals ceased, not gradually, but abruptly, as if extinguished by a single closing fist. A human signal came through, calm and clinical. Corridor cleared. Advancing to secondary vector. Recommend Concord forces remain behind our line. Kethron felt his limbs tremble. For the first time, the Velrothi understood the truth their ancestors had buried in archive warnings. They had not called allies. They had called apex predators. And now the galaxy was about to learn what it meant when predators decided a war should end. When help becomes annihilation. The enemy learned fear in fragments. At first, it was confusion, entire attack formations vanishing without the expected attrition curves. Then came disruption, as human fleets appeared where no reinforcement lanes should exist, striking from vectors the enemy had already deemed cleared. Finally, something unprecedented rippled through their command lattice. Retreat. Velrothi analysts stared at the data in disbelief. They're abandoning resource nodes, one said. They've never done that before. High strategist Kethron watched the display with a tightening in his chest. Human forces were advancing not in sweeping fronts, but in deliberate wedges, isolating enemy clusters and collapsing them inward. Every maneuver denied the enemy adaptation time. Every victory removed not just ships, but options. They're not reacting, Kethron murmured. They're dictating. Human warfare did not resemble the controlled exchanges the Concord was accustomed to. There were no pauses for reorganization, no signals of escalation thresholds. The humans maintained relentless pressure, forcing the enemy to respond continuously, never allowing strategic equilibrium to reassert itself. A human intelligence briefing was shared, unfiltered, as requested by the Concord. It was unsettling. Enemy cognition relies on distributed confidence, the human analyst explained. They don't panic like you do. They fail when they believe outcomes are inevitable. The display shifted, highlighting shattered enemy sectors. So we make defeat feel unavoidable. The next operation proved the point. At the Relo's Drift, a dense region of overlapping gravity wells, the enemy had massed a force large enough to annihilate any Concord fleet twice over. Velrothi commanders prepared evacuation plans. The humans prepared a lesson. Human ships deliberately fell back, broadcasting damaged transponder codes and distress signals stolen from enemy frequencies. The enemy surged forward, sensing opportunity. Confidence spiked across their lattice. Then the humans closed the trap. Gravitational anchors activated across the drift, collapsing safe FTL exits. Kinetic strikes followed, not random, but rhythmically timed to destabilize structural harmonics. Enemy ships collided with one another as navigation predictives failed. Human vessels cut through the chaos, firing point-blank into propulsion nodes, then moving on without confirming kills. They're leaving enemies alive, a Velrothi officer protested. Watch, Kethron said. Those damaged ships attempted to regroup. Instead, they broadcast panic, unfiltered disruption signals that propagated through the enemy network. The lattice convulsed. Human boarding teams arrived last. The feeds were unbearable. Humans fought in close quarters against creatures larger and stronger than themselves, using terrain, momentum, and sheer refusal to stop. When wounded, they fought harder. When surrounded, they detonated breaching charges that collapsed entire sections of hull. One human voice cut through the chaos, recorded and later analyzed. Doesn't matter if we die. They break first. Within hours, the Relo's Drift was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard of drifting wreckage and silent signals. Across the galaxy, observers took notice. Independent polities pulled their fleets back from shared borders. Long-standing conflicts froze overnight. Even species untouched by the war began revising emergency protocols. The human advance continued. They targeted not just fleets, but infrastructure, enemy breeding systems, supply fabrication nodes, data memories essential for adaptation. Each strike was surgical and irreversible. This is extermination, a Concord ethicist said softly. Kethron did not argue. He could not. The enemy attempted something no one had anticipated. Surrender. A structured signal pulsed through subspace, coherent, organized, offering cessation of hostilities in exchange for territory and survival. Velrothi delegates reacted with relief bordering on collapse. We can end this, one cried. We can negotiate. The message was forwarded to the human command. Admiral Calder listened in silence. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. They only learned to surrender because they believe they'll lose less by doing so. She gestured, and the display shifted to projections, enemy recovery curves, long-term resurgence probabilities. They will adapt to mercy. A junior Velrothi asked, trembling, "Isn't that what peace is?" Calder's gaze hardened. Peace is what comes after extinction-level threats are gone. The human response was brief and devastating. They initiated Operation Final Quietus. Human fleets converged on the enemy's core coordination system, a star-sized bioconstruct hidden within a nebular shroud. Concord science had deemed it untouchable. Humans did not attack it directly. They ignited the star. Using precisely placed mass drivers, they induced a controlled stellar instability. Not an explosion, but a sustained, lethal flare that bathed the construct in radiation it could not adapt to fast enough. Enemy signal spiked, then fractured. Across every front, remaining enemy units ceased coordinated action. Some drifted, some self-terminated, some went dark. The war ended not with celebration, but with silence. Kethron stood in the war hall long after the displays went blank. They had been saved, but as he watched the humans withdraw, disciplined and wordless, he realized the truth that would haunt the Concord for generations. They had not witnessed victory. They had witnessed a species finishing a job it believed should never be left undone. The galaxy, after humanity answered. The galaxy did not celebrate. When the last enemy signal faded into cosmic background noise, there were no victory broadcasts, no triumphal assemblies, no shared relief. There was only a spreading stillness, as if every thinking species had collectively paused to ask the same question. What have we unleashed? On Velra Prime, the skies were clear for the first time in cycles. Evacuation sirens were silent. The orbital defense grid powered down from emergency levels, its operators staring at consoles that no longer displayed red. Life continued, but it did so cautiously, as though the universe might change its mind. High strategist Kethron convened the Concord Council not to discuss rebuilding, but understanding. We survived, he said to the assembled delegates. But survival alone is insufficient. We must decide how we remember this. Historical projections filled the chamber. New classifications populated the archives at an alarming rate. Apex species, existential response force, Deathworlder, unrestricted, no category fit comfortably. Reports flooded in from across known space. Border conflicts dissolved overnight as fleets withdrew to defensive postures. Military academies quietly rewrote entire curricula, discarding doctrines of escalation control and symmetrical response. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy accepted that some wars could not be managed, only ended. And at the center of every report was the same phrase, translated into 100 languages. The humans arrived. Humanity itself did not linger. Their fleets did not occupy conquered space or demand tribute. They dismantled forward operating bases with the same efficiency they had built them, salvaging wreckage, enemy and human alike. Wounded ships were towed into formation. Fallen soldiers were accounted for with ritual precision. Their remains secured before the fleet moved on. No celebrations, no speeches, just departure. Kethron requested a final audience with Admiral Sarah Calder before the Terran fleet left Concord space. The meeting was granted without delay. They met aboard a human flagship, an environment deliberately uncomfortable to Velrathi physiology. Gravity pressed heavier than normal. The air was dense with metallic undertones. Calder stood when Kethron entered. Strategist. Admiral, Kethron replied. He inclined his crest deeply. On behalf of the Concord, I offer gratitude that words cannot contain. Calder accepted it with a nod. You're alive. That's enough. Kethron hesitated. There is unease among my people. Among all peoples. You saved us, but many fear what that salvation revealed. Calder's expression softened, just slightly. Good. Kethron startled. Good. Fear is honesty, she said. You asked us to stop an extinction. We did. If the galaxy learns to avoid creating the next one, then some good came of this beyond your survival. She gestured toward the stars beyond the viewport. We don't want to be your answer to every crisis. We want to be the answer you never need again. Yet, Kethron said quietly, if another extinction-level threat arises, Calder met his gaze. Then call. We'll come. The simplicity of it was more frightening than any threat. Before departing, humanity left behind data cores. Not weapons, but defensive schematics. Early warning systems. Evacuation algorithms. Designs meant to delay annihilation long enough that help would not arrive too late. A warning disguised as a gift. The Terran fleet departed as it had arrived, swiftly, decisively, without spectacle. Space bent, gravity screamed, and then they were gone. In the cycles that followed, the galaxy changed. New treaties were written with unspoken clauses. Exploration fleets flagged Sol and its surrounding sectors as high-risk interaction zones. Children were taught revised histories, where humans were no longer a footnote but a force of nature, like supernovae or black holes. Rare, catastrophic, and undeniable. Kethron oversaw the final archival record himself. He removed the old cautionary myth entries. He replaced them with a single statement, entered into every Concord database, and shared freely with the wider galaxy. Humanity is not a weapon to be aimed. Humanity is a boundary. Cross it, and the universe will correct you. On Velra Prime, life slowly returned to normal rhythms. Markets reopened. Art resumed. New generations were born who would never hear invasion sirens. Yet on clear nights, when the stars burned cold and sharp above the domes, Kethron sometimes imagined he could still feel the echo of distorted gravity, the imprint left behind by a fleet that had come not to conquer, but to finish a war. The galaxy had asked for help. What answered was not mercy, nor diplomacy, nor balance. It was a species forged on a world that taught a single, unforgiving lesson. Survive, or end what threatened survival. And the galaxy would remember that lesson for a very long time.